Some days feel almost too perfect to be real. The sky is clear, the air is crisp, and everything feels peaceful. For James and Maya, this Saturday was shaping up to be one of those days. James, 16 and effortlessly cool, leaned back on the park bench, lazily scrolling through his phone. He was the kind of kid who always found the humor in every situation, but even he had to admit he was enjoying this rare moment of calm. Beside him, Maya, his 15-year-old sister with an insatiable love for books, was so engrossed in her novel that she didn't even notice James snapping a sneaky photo of her for his Instagram story. "Caught you being a nerd," he teased, grinning. Maya rolled her eyes, but her lips twitched into a smile. It was a quiet moment, a perfect sibling snapshot in time. But life, as it often does, had other plans. In the distance, the sharp sound of screeching tires cut through the calm. James sat up straighter. Maya lowered her book. 2 police cars had just pulled into the park, their lights flashing, the officers inside moving with purpose. Neither of them realized it yet, but their world was about to shift in a way they'd never forget. At first, James thought maybe someone was in trouble, a lost child or a minor accident. But when the officers started walking directly toward them, a chill ran down his spine. "What's happening?" Maya whispered, clutching her book tightly to her chest like a shield. James shrugged, trying to appear unfazed, but the knot in his stomach was growing. "I don't know. Just stay cool," he said, though his voice was tighter than usual. One of the officers, tall and broad-shouldered with an intimidating stance, stopped a few feet from them. His voice was cold and commanding. "Stand up. Hands where I can see them." James froze for a moment, caught off guard. Is there a problem?" he asked, his voice steady but cautious. The officer didn't answer. Instead, his partner spoke up, his tone clipped and dismissive. "We've had reports of suspicious individuals in the area. You match the description." James's heart sank. He knew what this was. He'd heard the stories, seen the videos online. But now it wasn't some distant event, it was happening to him and Maya. "Suspicious?" Maya's voice cracked as she spoke. "We're just sitting here." The officers exchanged a glance, ignoring her protest. "IDs. Now," the taller one said, his hand resting on his belt as if daring them to argue. Maya's heart was pounding so loudly she could barely hear herself think. Her hands shook as she handed over her ID, tears stinging the corners of her eyes. James tried to remain calm, his jaw tight, his fists clenched at his sides. "You're not going to find anything," James said, his voice quieter now, though the anger simmered just below the surface. "We're not doing anything wrong." The officers didn't respond. They searched everything. Maya's notebook, her pens, a granola bar she hadn't finished, James's phone charger, a folded receipt, even a spare pair of socks he'd stuffed into his bag weeks ago. All the while, James and Maya could feel eyes on them. Parents at the playground, joggers passing by, they were all watching. Some looked curious. Others looked uncomfortable. But no one stepped forward. No one said a word. For James, the worst part wasn't the search. It was the looks. He could feel their judgment, their silent questions. What did they do? Their eyes seemed to ask. Why are they being searched? Maya's voice broke through his thoughts, trembling and barely above a whisper. "Why is this happening to us, James?" James didn't have an answer. He wanted to shield her, to protect her, but in that moment, he felt completely powerless. And just like that, it was over. No explanation. No apology. Just a dismissive, "You can leave." James knelt down to pick up Maya's book, brushing off the dirt before handing it to her. She took it without a word, her eyes fixed on the ground. They gathered their belongings in silence, the weight of humiliation pressing down on them. As they walked home, neither of them spoke. The quiet between them was heavy, filled with questions they didn't know how to ask and feelings they didn't know how to express. By the time they got home, the anger had started to boil over. James and Maya sat at the table, recounting every humiliating detail to their parents. Their mother, trying to stay calm for the kids, kept asking, "Are you okay? Did they hurt you?" But Mr. Carter didn't say a word. He stood by the window, staring out into the distance, his hands gripping his arms so tightly his knuckles turned white. "They didn't even apologize," James said, his voice rising with frustration. "They treated us like criminals, Dad. For sitting in a park." Maya wiped her eyes with her sleeve. It was like we didn't matter, she whispered. Finally, Mr. Carter turned around, his voice low but firm. They had no right to treat you like that, he said, his words deliberate and measured. No right at all. Maya looked up, her eyes filled with desperation. What can we do, Dad? She asked. How do we make it stop? Mr. Carter walked over to her, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. We fight back. The right way. He glanced at James, his gaze steady. This isn't over. I promise you that. Mr. Carter wasn't just any father. As a seasoned diplomat, he was no stranger to conflict, no stranger to injustice. But this time, it wasn't about politics or treaties, it was personal. He walked into the police station with a calm authority that turned heads. He wasn't there to yell or make empty threats. He was there to demand accountability. Mr. Carter spoke with precision, outlining every misstep the officers had taken. Your officers violated protocol, he began, sliding a document across the table. They had no probable cause, no justification for their actions. They profiled my children based on nothing but the color of their skin. That is not only unethical, it's illegal. The officers shifted in their seats, their earlier confidence now replaced by discomfort. The chief cleared his throat, trying to interrupt, but Mr. Carter didn't let up. My children deserve an apology, he continued, his voice growing firmer. And your department needs to address this systemic failure. This isn't just about my family, this is about every family that has been targeted unfairly. Change starts here. The chief finally nodded, his voice hesitant but respectful. Mr. Carter, we take these accusations seriously. I assure you, we will review this matter thoroughly. Good, Mr. Carter said, standing up and gathering his papers. Because if you don't, I will make sure this conversation reaches a much larger audience. By the next evening, the apology was public. The police chief stood at a podium, acknowledging the department's failure and promising to review their practices. For James and Maya, it was a small victory, but a meaningful one. It's not just about what they said, James murmured, watching the screen. It's about making sure this doesn't happen again. Mr. Carter nodded, his expression proud but serious. This isn't the end, he said. But it's a step in the right direction. And no matter what, you two will always have me in your corner. Maya leaned into her father's side, finally allowing herself to smile. For the first time since that terrible afternoon, she felt safe. Have you ever faced an experience like this, one where standing up for what's right made all the difference? Or maybe you know someone whose story deserves to be heard. Share your stories in the comments below. And if this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us here at Story Haven. Because every story matters, and sometimes, sharing them can change the world.